Everybody wants a Tesla. We know that. A lot of people, maybe not everybody, sorry, but a lot of people are looking to get into their first car and they're looking to minimize their payments. And Tesla will not sell you a car at the end of the lease. But the big factor here, the big gotcha with Tesla is even though a Model 3 or a Model Y qualify for the federal tax credit, they don't give you that $7,500 as a cap cost reduction. Hello and welcome to another episode of Out of Spec Dave, where I was thinking about the topic of purchasing an electric vehicle or leasing an electric vehicle. There's been a lot in the news recently about maybe some hot deals with respect to leasing, but you got to be careful, and I want to take you through it. I just want to give a little bit of context around the variables and some of the things that go into leasing that you really should consider. Look, the best thing you can ever do, don't overbuy. If you can't afford it, don't get it. Leasing can be very attractive to those because sometimes those leasing payments are super cheap. And sometimes that makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. So let's get into it. Okay, so first let's talk about some of the pros of leasing a vehicle. Perhaps the biggest one that everyone comes to thinking about is the fact that you'll have lower monthly payments when you're comparing it to financing. And I'll get into some of the specifics around this with respect to residual values and money factors and how to really understand the true cost of this. But you're not really paying for the whole car. By the way, another word for leasing is renting. You're not owning the car. And there could be some benefits to that, right? Especially when it comes to EVs, because having access to newer vehicles, look, technology is changing so fast. In 3 years, imagine if you do a 3-year lease, it's possible that Tesla or any other company may come out with a super new technology that you're going to want, or better batteries that last, twice as long for half the money. And if you buy the car, you may take a bath on that, on the car that you own. So you're really transferring the risk from yourself investing your own money into someone else, a leasing company buying the car, owning the car, and then renting it to you. You also oftentimes will align yourself with the warranty. So if you never want to drive a car out of warranty, then you can reduce your maintenance costs. If you have, let's say, a 4-year, 50,000-mile warranty on a car, and you do a 3-year, let's say, 36,000-mile lease, you're not going to be driving that car out of warranty in any time. And then the fourth benefit is, with respect to electric vehicles in particular, are tax incentives. Now, we all know that there is if you qualify, and you have to ask your accountant if you do, there is a $7,500 federal tax credit that you can apply for. Let's say if I buy a car this year, I can apply for that next year in 2024 for the year 2023. And what's interesting is that there are very specific cars that actually qualify on a purchase for that $7,500 federal tax credit. Now, remember back in the day, the law was that when the manufacturer sold their 200,000th car, which Tesla did a while ago, GM did a while ago, then what happened was that $7,500 federal tax credit got cut in half to $3,750. And then 6 months later, it got cut in half again to $1,875. And then it was eliminated after, I think it was like a three-month thing. So this year, that federal tax credit has been reinstated for Tesla. But the stipulation is that the government said that a lot of the car has to be made in the United States. So I'm not going to get into all the details, but it's suffice to say that every single model of a Tesla Model Y will qualify for a $7,500 federal tax credit. And right now, every single Model 3 also qualifies. There was this weird period of time from April 18th when the rear-wheel drive, the car I drive, the LFP Model 3, it did qualify for the $7,500 before April 18th, and then it didn't after April 18th because the battery pack is made by CATL, and that's a Chinese company. But the lobbyists, I don't know what the heck happened, but Tesla convinced the government, the federal government, to reinstate retroactively the $7,500 federal tax credit on any of the cars that have Chinese-made battery packs. So basically what that means is a car up to $55,000 in MSRP base value will qualify for the 7,500. When you think about, let's say, a Hyundai Ioniq 5 Genesis GV60, like when Kathy bought her Genesis last year, the GV60, she got that $7,500 federal tax credit. But on January 1st this year, because that car was made in South Korea, she didn't qualify for it. But what's really interesting is that depending on the manufacturer, you could lease a car from a manufacturer that doesn't qualify if you're purchasing the car in the United States. There's this loophole that allows the manufacturer to pass on that $7,500 to you in what's called a cap cost reduction. So what it does is it minimizes the amount of principal that you need to reduce over the life of the lease. And that can really greatly reduce the amount of the payments themselves, which is pretty wild. Now, one of some of the cons of leasing, though, is you don't own the car. So at the end of the lease term, you're getting the opportunity to purchase the car for a set value that they call the residual value. So let's just say the car is worth 50 grand and there's a 62% residual value. You can actually, at the time that you sign that lease contract, you're going to know exactly how much you can buy that car for. Assuming, and that's really independent of how many miles you put on the car. So if you contract to lease a car for 3 years, 36,000 miles, 12,000 miles a year, you're allowed to drive the car up to 36,000 miles. If you go over 36,000 miles, the leasing company is going to go, well, wait a minute, I got to charge you an overage fee. And usually that's around 25 cents for every mile you go over that amount. But if you buy the car at the end of the lease for whatever that established residual value is, it doesn't matter how many miles you went over. If you decide that you don't want the car, you're going to have to pay a price to, when the lease is up, you're going to have to pay that overage charge. At the end of the lease, you're really not going to be building up any equity or any kind of trade-in value. So you have to remember that. You may be pouring out a lot of money. See, years ago, I know that a lot of businesses, what they do is they separate business expenses from personal expenses, and then businesses are able to write the leases off. But it's many years ago, leasing got introduced to the consumer because of the fact that you're only having to reduce principal by a certain amount, basically the selling price of the car minus the residual value. So, it became very popular with individuals, consumers, to lease cars because it was cheaper payment. Wow. Hey, listen, I could get this, BMW 7 Series for $799 a month, or you could buy it for $1,399 a month. What are you going to do, right? So a lot of people were swayed into that. The other thing, one of the things you have to worry about is that if you do have excessive wear on the car, or if there's damage to the car and you don't fix it, unless you take out excessive wear or damage insurance, then it's possible that you may have some charges from penalties at the end of the lease. One good thing, though, I can tell you with a lot of expensive cars, and why a lot of people will transfer the risk to someone else, because if you get into an accident with your car and it does get fixed, then you've got diminished value in your car because the Carfax will show that the car has been hit and it's not going to be worth as much. So wouldn't you rather have someone else owning that car? So there's all these factors that go into leasing versus buying. But again, I wanted to really focus today on EVs and what's going on with respect to EVs today, because it's important to really evaluate your specific needs, your desires, your budgets, and all of that. So one of the interesting things that I just recently found out is that with Tesla, even though a Model 3 or a Model Y, now all models, will qualify for that $7,500 federal tax credit, assuming you qualify, Model 3s and Model Ys will all qualify. The fact that Model S's and Model X's won't. If you lease a Tesla, that $7,500 is not passed on to you as a cap cost reduction in calculating the lease payment. And so, but if you lease a Chevy Bolt, okay, which is a car that GM or GM Financing, or I don't know who the leasing company is, I guess GMAC or whoever it is these days, they will actually pass that on to you. And what's even more incredible is that a lot of the cars that are not eligible for a federal tax credit because they're not made in the United States, let's just say a German-made ID4 before, the Chattanooga cars came out, or, a Kona or an Ioniq 5 or an EV6, none of those cars will qualify for that $7,500 federal tax credit as a purchase, but they will, my understanding is they will on a lease. So I want to take you through the math here so that you understand what are the components that go into calculating a lease, so that if you do go down the path, even with Tesla, at the end of the day, if you're just looking to lease a car for 36 months and then walk away from it, all that matters is how much out of pocket do you have to pay, and then what's the lease payment, and then what are the terms in terms of miles over, and then can you buy the insurance, for any kind of excessive wear and tear on the car. So there's a lot of factors that go into this. So what I want to do right now is I want to take you through a spreadsheet, and I want to show you how a typical lease is built. Now, everything I'm going to take you through, it applies pretty much to every lease except Ford. Ford has had this wacky thing for years. I could never figure out their leases, called the red carpet lease, and they do things very differently. And so these are the terms that we're going to start going into. I'm going to show you a spreadsheet. I'm going to walk you through it, and we're going to build how you can actually calculate a lease payment. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly down to the penny, but these are the concepts that go into it. So the four pieces of information that you really need to understand when leasing a car is: what is the MSRP of the car? What is the negotiated selling price of the car? Now, in Tesla's case, usually they're one and the same because they're not negotiable. What is the residual value that is set at the time that you take the lease out that gives you the option to buy the car? Now, again, in Tesla's case, you can't buy the car at the end of the lease, which is wild. And in Tesla's case, Tesla does not give you that $7,500 towards that cap cost reduction. So, and one of the other things you want to be careful about is that if you put a lot of money down on a lease as a cap cost reduction in order to get your payment way down, I caution you to do that, because if you total the car, you lose that money. So a lot of people will always say put as little money down as possible, usually maybe just the tax, and some will actually allow you to even put the tax into the lease payment. But understand, if you do that, you're going to be paying interest on the tax as well. I definitely don't recommend that you do that. But and then there's an interest rate. And the interest rate that's calculated, the leasing companies, they play this funny game. They call it a money factor. It's like this wacky number. It's like 0.009217. And in order to figure out what does that translate into, is that 3.9% money? Is that 6% money? Whatever it is, here's the little trick. All you do is you take that money factor and you multiply it by 2,400. And then you take that number, and that becomes the interest rate. But in order to figure out the interest factor, and I'll show you this in a spreadsheet in a minute, what you do is you take the purchase price of the car. I know this is going to sound wacky. You take the purchase price of the car and you add to that the MSRP price of the car. So let's just say you buy a car that's an MSRP of $50,000, and you actually negotiate $5,000 off on the price of that car. You take the money factor, let's say it's 0.00 whatever, 9917, and you multiply that times 95,000, selling price plus purchase price, and that gives you the interest component of the lease payment. And it took me a long time to understand this, because I was like, well, wait a minute. Are you paying interest on the overall value of the car? Or are you paying interest on the overall value of the car plus whatever you paid for the car, or plus the MSRP? And the answer is, this money factor figures it all out, so that you take the list price of the car plus the selling price of the car times the money factor, and that gives you the interest component of the lease. Now, in order to determine the principal component of the lease, all you do is you take, let's say, the selling price of the car, $45,000, and let's say the residual is set at $30,000. So what you need to do is reduce that principal by $15,000 over 36 months. And what happens is you take 15,000 divided by 36, that becomes the principal component of the lease payment. You take the selling price plus the MSRP times the money factor, that becomes the interest component of the car, of the lease payment. And then you take that lease payment and you multiply it times the sales tax rate that where you live, and that becomes the total price of the lease on a monthly basis. Now, one other thing I would just want to caution you about is that oftentimes there are lease disposition fees. So when you turn in the lease, or when you turn in the car at the end of the lease, even if there aren't any, let's say, excessive wear or overage on terms of mileage, what they may do is they may hit you with a $395 fee to actually kill the lease. Or if you buy the car, they may actually charge you money to buy the car, in addition to the residual value. And then the other thing where they get you is typically there's a bank fee in order to put the lease into effect. And those things can be $795. They can be over $1,000. So when you start adding up all these factors, I start to question whether or not it makes sense. Now, true, it's amazing. Some of these lease deals that are out there on EVs today, and especially if you have a business where you can write off the lease payment as an expense against your LLC or something like that. I mean, consult your tax accountant. But I'm not saying don't lease. I'm just saying understand the components that go into leasing and be really careful. So let's shift gears. Let's build a quick little spreadsheet, and I want to take you through how a typical lease payment is calculated so that when you actually decide to go and look at a car, you fall in love with it, you pick out the color, now you're like, do I lease it or do I buy it? At least you're a little more empowered as to whether or not you're making the right decision. So let's shift over to an Excel spreadsheet right now. I've created a spreadsheet here that you can see. I'm going to walk you through this. Let's assume this is a 3-year, 36,000 mile lease. Some leasing companies will say, do you want to actually have a lease for 24 months, 2 years? Some may say 48 months. There's all different terms. Some are 30 months. But let's say for purposes of this example, we're going to do a 3-year, 36,000 mile lease. That means you've got 12,000 miles every year to drive on average. It doesn't matter if you drive 6,000 the first year and 18,000 the second year and 12,000 the third. As long as you don't go over that 36,000 miles between the time that you take the car home from delivery to the time you return it back to the leasing company, then you're fine. Okay. Let's also assume that the leasing company sets a residual value of 62% on this particular lease that we're using as an example. And let's also assume that you're not going to go over the allotted miles of 36,000 miles. Now, if you were to go over those miles, like I mentioned before, these leasing companies, they could stick it to, so they may say 25 cents a mile. But if you actually lease another car from us, they just like keep you on the crack, right? They keep you going. We'll waive the overcharge. We'll waive the fees in terms of, the fact that you have a little nick or a dent or maybe a scratch on the car here or there. They want to get you back on the sauce. They want you to lease another car from them because cash flow is king for them. Even if you return, I'm saying if you return your car at the end of the lease, they want to get you into a new lease. Again, which has its advantages. You get a new car every few years. It's pretty cool. For me, that's a long time. You all know that. But anyway, let's go through this example here. The MSRP is, in this example, $53,000. Let's say with your amazing negotiating skills, you get $3,000 off the car, and the selling price is $50,000. Okay, and you notice that you've got a residual value of 62% in this particular example. So the residual value is set based on the MSRP of the car times the residual value. So this cell right here is actually MSRP times 62%. That's all it is. It's a set number that the leasing company says you can buy the car at the end of the lease term, no matter how many miles are on it. You can buy the car for $32,860. Sometimes it's a good thing to actually buy the cars. Some people overfund leases. I won't get into that. It gets a little tricky, but but the leasing companies, they try and set the residuals so as to what they think the cars are going to be worth in 3 years. And with EVs, it's kind of wacky. So residual values typically with EVs that I've seen are much lower than 62%. But again, I'm just using this as an example from a math standpoint. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to reduce over the life of that lease, 36 months, the difference between the selling price of the vehicle and the residual value. That's the principal component of the lease payment. And so that in this particular example is $17,140. Now, let's assume we don't put any money down on this lease. You hear no money down leases, right? Cap cost reduction is zero. That's another term for it. That means that over the life of this 36-month lease, you're going to have to reduce principal by $17,140. $17,140 divided by 36 is $476.11. That's the first component of the lease payment. There are 3 components to it. I've marked them all in green here. And that's what that is. Now, the second component we're going to talk about is the interest. The first one was principal. The second one is interest. All right. Now, this is where these leasing companies, they talk a foreign language. Oh, what's the money factor? Well, it's not really that difficult unless it's a Ford red carpet lease. At least the last time I checked Ford, I didn't understand how they calculated leases. So you're on your own, unless they've actually gone to the masses the way everybody else does it. But there'll be a money factor. And they'll tell you the money factor is 0.002567 as an example. Sometimes they may actually say it's a 6.16% lease interest factor, interest on the lease. And they're being nice if they tell you that. Most of these guys, they just talk money factors, right? But all you got to do is take the money factor, multiply it by a constant number of 2,400, and that then turns into the interest rate, 6.16. Okay, that part is straightforward. But this is the most wacky thing that I've ever heard of. But this is the way you calculate the interest component of the lease payment is by taking the MSRP and adding to that the price, the negotiated price of the car, and you multiply that times the money factor. And what that does is it gives you the interest component of the lease on a monthly basis. So in this case, we're taking $53,000 plus $50,000 for a total of $103,000. And then you're multiplying that $103,000 times this money factor of 0.002567, which is basically 6.16% money. And you're now, the interest component of this lease payment is $264.40. Okay. You guys with me so far? All right, pretty simple. You got a principal component, you got an interest component. Now what you need to do is add those two together. And in this case, you've got a lease payment of $740.51. Now, if you have, let's say where you live, where you're going to register the car, a sales tax of 7.25%, you could just write the check to the leasing company of 7.25 times $740.51 times 36 months. And that will then take care of the tax on the lease. You can also, some cases, I don't advise doing this, but sometimes you can actually put the tax into the lease. But when you do that, you have to understand you're paying interest on the tax as well. Again, it gets a little funky, but in this case, if we were to take 7.25% times $740.51, that's a $53.69 interest, a tax component of the lease. So then if you add up these 3 green numbers, 476.11, the principal component of the lease, plus the interest component of the lease, which is $264.40, plus $53.69, then your total lease payment is $794.20. That's how it works. Now, I wouldn't recommend putting, not paying the tax in the lease and doing that because you'll pay interest on the tax, which doesn't make any sense to me. Now, this is where things get a little spicy when it comes to electric vehicles, because there is a $7,500 federal tax credit that we all hear about and talk about. And it's possible you may not make enough money to qualify for that tax credit. And it's also possible you may make too much money to qualify for that tax credit. And it's also possible that the car that you're buying may not actually qualify for the $7,500 federal tax credit. So with those things in mind, again, there is not like one binary answer here. You should do this. But if you understand the factors that go into this, then you can make a decision. So let's just say you're buying an Ioniq 5. Doesn't qualify for the $7,500 federal tax credit if you buy the car. In my case, I just bought a Model 3. I got a $7,500 federal tax credit that when I file my taxes in 2024 for tax year 2023, I'll be able to take that as a credit on how much money I owe. Interestingly enough, in 2024, the companies that are the dealers or even Tesla who's selling you the cars, they're going to be able to take that $7,500 federal tax credit right off the price of the car at the point of sale. So if you buy a car in January of 2024, you don't have to wait until April of 2025 to claim that $7,500. That's pretty cool, because now the government is incentivizing people to accelerate the impact of when they can actually take advantage of that federal tax credit. Again, this is on a purchase. So what happens in that case also is that if you're on a budget and you really are going to finance, let's say you're buying a car for 40 grand and you know you're going to get a $7,500 federal tax credit the following year for this tax year, you'll have to finance that $7,500. But next year, if you wait, they'll take that right off the price of the car. And so it's like you're putting a huge down payment on the car, and you won't have to pay interest on that car, on that federal tax credit. So again, really cool things. I'm not sure how dealers are going to enforce the fact that you qualify for a federal tax credit at the point of sale. It's hard enough when you do your taxes with the CPA for them to determine if you either make too little money or make too much money and qualify for it or not. I don't know how the dealers are going to do it. It's going to get wacky next year, but it's a good thing they're doing that. Okay, now here's where things get very interesting. In the case of an Ioniq 5, does not qualify for a $7,500 federal tax rate. The car's made in South Korea. Sorry, does not qualify. However, the loophole is that if you lease a Hyundai Ioniq 5, then you will get that $7,500 as a cap cost reduction. All right, so see what happens here is if you don't put any cap cost reduction down. Now, by the way, if you take money out of your own pocket, let's say $7,500, and you put that down on a lease as a cap cost reduction, you can do that. And that will lower the principal component of the lease payment for sure. But if you total that car, you don't get that money back. Unless there's some wacky insurance thing that gives you, I forget what they call it, gap insurance of some sort. There may be things, the products that you can buy when you sign the lease to protect yourself on cap cost reductions. But again, that's getting a little too technical. But in this case here, if you don't put any money down, either out of your pocket or in the form of that $7,500 federal tax credit that Hyundai will give you, it's my understanding, they will give that to you as a full credit, as a full cap cost reduction onto this lease. So it goes from $476.11 for the principal component of the lease all the way down. Now watch this. When I type in $7,500, that goes down to $267. And so your lease payment goes down to $532.18, which is really good. And again, that's assuming that you pay the taxes out of pocket, which again, I would recommend. Now, here's the thing. I'm hoping this helps you think about what's the best way to purchase or lease your EV. You may not qualify for the $7,500. The leasing company does. You may not qualify because you make too little money or too much money. but the leasing company does, assuming the car qualifies. I mean, it's not like you can buy a $80,000, sedan that doesn't qualify for the federal tax credit. It has to be $55,000 or less if it's a sedan, or $80,000 or less if it's an SUV. But if you've got a situation where it's a foreign car and it doesn't qualify for the federal tax credit, even though you do from an income standpoint, then it's not going to matter. But if you lease it, it will. So by putting this $7,500 down, the leasing company, and giving that to you, it greatly reduces the actual principal component of the lease payment. The one thing is with Tesla, and this is what I want to caution you about. Everybody wants a Tesla. We know that. A lot of people, maybe not everybody, sorry, but a lot of people are looking to get into their first car and they're looking to minimize their payments. And Tesla will not sell you a car at the end of the lease. I don't know how they figure out what the lease payment's going to be. So you have to potentially think about what, use this similar type of a spreadsheet to be able to calculate what a lease payment would be. But the big factor here, the big gotcha with Tesla is even though a Model 3 or a Model Y qualify for the federal tax credit, they don't give you that $7,500 as a cap cost reduction. And if you've learned and listened to what I've said here, you can see why I'm saying in the title of this video, be very careful leasing a Tesla. Other cars, think about your situation. Tesla, there's no way I would lease a Tesla. There's just no way. Unless I've got, let's say, my company is paying for the car and I would just want a Tesla and they want the tax write-off. Things get a little complicated with businesses. But I think that I'm hoping that this is something that will help you in making your decisions as far as whether or not you buy or lease. And if you lease, understand what a residual is, what is a money factor, how to convert the money factor into an interest rate, how do you calculate the principal component of the lease, how do you calculate the interest component of the lease. Why am I suggesting you pay the tax out of pocket? Even though you may see some of these Volkswagen ads, sign and drive events, 0 money down, 0 do-it signing, 0 first month's and last month's payment. There's all these different things. Oh yeah, that's one of the other things that I forgot to mention is usually they ask for security deposits on leases as well. So be careful with leasing because the upfront costs that you're actually going to be putting out of pocket before you even lease the car, they could be going so much better towards putting that money down as principal reduction on a purchase. And, you can finance money out quite a long time, 72 months. You can go even 84 months. I've seen some companies go 96 months. I'm not saying I would do that, but, you can get those payments down, but be careful with interest rates. Be careful with length of terms of loans. Understand how the leasing works. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Send me an email, david@specstudios.com. I hope this helps you. Anyway, thanks again for watching another episode of Out of Spec Dave, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care now. Bye-bye.